Hey everybody, welcome in. It's the Monster Rod Holders Power Hour. My name's Pontoon Jody, and tonight's guest is Epic Catfishing. How you doing tonight?
There's no ing on it. It's just epic catfish.
Oh,
Jody.
really?
Everybody makes that mistake. That's all right.
Oh, my bad.
Everybody does. No, how am I doing? I'm doing all right. I suppose I would like to fish more, but it just hasn't worked out very good this year.
Well, you started that new business. You travel a lot, and
I do. I'm getting ready to travel up to Michigan again with a trailer load of furniture.
yeah.
Never stops, never ends.
Well, you got to take care of family and home life first. We
Oh
all
yeah,
got our responsibilities.
yeah. Responsibilities come first.
Yeah.
But I was able to get out and go fishing after I got angry enough about not being able to go. I
Hmm.
decided to go by myself, and that was a giant mistake because I really wasn't. And my plans were to stay on an island for 3, 4 days, maybe fish 4 or 5 different pools, maybe just two or three.
Hmm.
And the first night that I went, I planned to get moon eye. And the river had dropped so hard after it was so high for so long. At normal levels, moon eye is pretty easy to get in certain places. But when they drop the water level, the moon eye will come off of the shallow fast water stuff
Hmm.
and go deep. And so that was kind of because if you go to Dead Man's Hole or you go to Keokuk or you go to whatever, especially on a 4-day trip, I make it a point never to leave without good bait already. And so I
Yeah.
planned to get some moon eye. Well, the moon eye were scarce, but I was able to catch a whole bunch of big donkey baits. I mean, giant. I mean, some of the biggest suckers, and I still have them right now because I am planning on going again. But I mean, I'm not so sure I didn't catch a state record sucker. I mean, that thing was like 9. It was like
Wow. Hmm.
huge. I thought it was actually dark when I caught it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just a big common carp, but it turned out to be a sucker that was like, I mean, stupid big around like that. And it ended up dying, unfortunately, because they're kind of
Hmm.
suckers are difficult to keep alive. I can do it, but you always have a certain amount of fatality, so you just got to cut them up and freeze them. I mean, the tail piece was that big around right there. I mean,
My
just the
goodness.
tail piece. The head was bigger than a softball. And I was so looking forward to,
Hmm.
putting that on a 16-aught hook after I marked a giant and catching a big fish on the biggest freaking sucker I've ever had. And it just didn't work out yet. Yet.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I decided I was going to fish one of my number one spots in that pool for numbers and an occasional big flathead. No blues in this area.
Hmm.
And so with the water being down, they weren't looking for a major current break. They were looking for more current. So it didn't surprise me that I didn't catch anything in the first hour at the Centennial Bridge where I
Hmm.
basically hook up to it. Whoever's in here has probably seen us go live there. Uh, well, after no bites there, I'm like, I got to change my direction big time. And so once I changed it to looking at wing dikes, and there's about 7 wing dikes in the very local vicinity to that bridge. And I looked at about 4 or 5, and I looked at one that's not particularly deep, not particularly all that awesome, but it's lower in the water. So there's
Hmm.
at low water, it's got 7 foot above it, above the high point. So from the very high point, it's got another 7 foot of water, and there's quite a bit of current that rushes over it. Well, as it so happens, even if there was blues up here in my pool close to my house, they would not hang out there. It's geared towards flatheads because
Hmm.
of current on the bottom is nice, is a nice gentle walk. It's not real fast. It's not real deep. So I looked and looked and looked, and I'm like, yeah, I'm marking some fish that aren't normally here because there's not a lot of wood. There's not a lot of rocks. It's basically sand and clay. And if you're going through and you're marking those blips on the bottom, and I'll use this little deal right here. Just say it's usually flat, and you got one blip,
Mm-hmm.
just, and it doesn't even have to be red. It can look like a rock. It's just not supposed to be there. And I noticed that there was flatheads there. So, but they were back away from the high point of the dike, and so you got the current coming this direction. The dike is up, and the upstream is this way, and the downstream is this way. So, it's kind of a pyramid, kind of angle shape like that, like this. And I'm explaining it because I know a lot of people don't have wing dikes where they fish, but it is one of the coolest things on the Mississippi River when you can target wing dikes and they're there, because sometimes they're not there, and
Mm-hmm.
you just got to kind of cross it off your list. But once you formulate that and say, okay, we've got flatheads or blues sitting behind these dikes, but usually when they're sitting there, in low water, there's not a lot of current below the dike where it goes like this, and right off the downstream side, there's not a lot of current. So you won't necessarily mark very many big fish or many fish at all in that
Mm-hmm.
kind of dead water until at the right time. And it was, I don't know, 30 minutes before dark. And I set up and I noticed that they were 100 yards, well, not quite 100 yards, probably 70 yards from the high point of that wing deck. And so I anchored in front of it and then let anchor rope back until I could mark those fish. And then I pulled up the appropriate distance and deployed some baits. Well, pretty much immediately, I caught one small one and then I caught another one. But all of a sudden, as it got closer to dark, here comes the skulking marks, and they came along the bottom, and they were so slow that they looked like a big red and yellow tube.
Really?
Oh yeah, because when you're using your down technology
Mm-hmm.
on your sonar, it's different than side scan. It's different than your 3D. It's just
Mm-hmm.
2D, and they'll come in if they're high. I assume that they're not flatheads. They could be drum. They could be channel cat.
Mm-hmm.
They could be carp. They could be buffalo. They could be a lot of things. They could be Asian carp in some certain pools. But when they're like an inch from the bottom,
Yeah.
they come in and they're just coming along your bottom on your sonar, and they're kind of high and they're so slow. I'm like, flatheads are moving up. So I had to hurry up and reel everything in and pull the rope in to where the ass end of the boat here is at the high point, and then I had to let it back just a little bit because it's that where the dike is on the downstream side. It's the contact point is right there, so they're moving upstream low,
Mm-hmm.
and contact point is at the base of the dike. You can catch fish up, you can catch fish a little bit behind, but if you can get that right at the base,
Mm-hmm.
you've got water coming this way. They'll literally nose into that base and then start moving laterally, okay, from bank to bank,
Yeah.
searching for fish that have tumbled down that dike, or even moon eye, or even whatever's down there. Whatever's down
Mm-hmm.
there, they're going to surprise it. Well, I had thrown one. I had moved the boat up, and I had taken a giant sunfish about that big, not a bluegill, a sunfish. So a sunfish would be either like a hybrid green sunfish bluegill or a green sunfish, and I literally threw kind of a hybrid, and so I got a PC Fun 50 with 30-pound test and like not my big donkey rods. I've got my flat,
Mm-hmm.
and it happened to be the lightest weight flathead thing that I pretty much had in the boat. And I've caught a ton of giant flatheads on very lightweight rods because for some reason those heavy ones, they'll just feel it and spit it for some reason. But anyway, I throw it out and I don't even have the rod at the back of the boat. I got it like up by I've got a couple rod holders that are up by the console, which are probably 2/3 of the way up the boat. So I throw it sideways, almost where the 7 foot was, and the current was just enough. Because if you throw it right at the crevice,
Yeah.
it'll go back. So I had to throw it on 7 foot, and luckily the current was just enough. It settled it perfect, and the rod kind of bows down a little bit like that because it's a little bit lighter weight, and I couldn't throw 50-pound test without throwing about a 12-ounce sinker that far sideways because all that current would have just drug it back. But with 30-pound test and about 4 ounces of weight, it sat perfect. Well, here I was, no camera, no lights on, no nothing, and I'm like deploying other stuff towards the deeper spot of the dike, which the tip usually has a scour hole in the tip. Now, I don't generally catch monsters there, but sometimes I do, so I'm paying attention to that. I'm remembering where I've marked some things and I'm throwing whatever, and I look over and I see the rod go, boom, and all of a sudden it just starts to load up. Now, it's loading up, but it's so far sideways that it's just dragging back in the current like this, and I knew pretty much what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew it was a flathead, but I didn't know until I picked up the rod and basically set the hook. Because even using circle hooks, even big circle hooks, when you're throwing perpendicular to the current, when you're throwing crossways, as they go down, sometimes your rod will just do this. But this one was moving fast enough back in the current that when I picked it up, basically set the hook.
Yeah.
And I knew what I had. It was giant because of the wavelength of how it was swimming and all this stuff. So I'm like, well, and I had made such a big deal on TikTok that I was angry that I wasn't able to go fishing and I hadn't caught any giants. And so I did, I don't know, 2 or 3 late night with the angry hat on and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I said, I'm leaving and I'm not coming home until I catch a giant or I battle a monster or whatever it was that I said. And I thought, okay. So I flipped some lights on. I got some side lights on the boat and all this stuff. And I reached over for the tripod and I put that on the front deck and I slapped the phone in it and I turned it on. And here I was filming myself talking to the camera and doing all this. And, it's rip and drag and doing all this. It actually would have made a great video. And I actually planned to put it on YouTube. But as it got closer, it came up in the light, and it was a monster. I mean, well over 4 foot, well over 4 foot. Because it kind of came up, kind of belly up sideways because it got hooked in the corner of the mouth, out of the distance in the light. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And I knew it was going to be a challenge because even though the water's low, those wing dikes concentrate current in that upper third. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. So I'm trying to get, and I've got a Hydro Web 80, awesome net. But every time I try to get that fish stiffened up, it wouldn't let me, because I'm trying to hold the rod with one hand. And it's like way back and I'm struggling and we're already almost 30 minutes. I bet I tried to net it like at least 6 times.
Wow.
At least 6 times. I'm doing everything stupid. I'm doing everything wrong. I'm like, what am I going to do here? So, my bad hand with my bad finger that I basically cut off and they sewed back on, I was trying to run the net with that and it wasn't working because I couldn't control it very good. And what I should have done is I should have just not tried to net it myself, and I just should have just lipped it because I ended up lipping it anyway. But long story short, after so many times trying, when I'm wearing the fish down and it now it's starting to open its mouth and it's starting to drag back in the current, and it was still warm, and it's at night and I'm sweating. I'm sweating, And, and I'm like, what am I going to do here? And, if I had a net man, it's pretty easy. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not easy, but, get it up. Net man goes down below, and you got 12 feet between, the rod
Mhm.
tip and the thing. I got to get this monster, this giant with like 3 foot of line. And every time I did that and it turned, my dropper weight got caught in the net. It like
Mhm.
fell through the net because it wasn't an
Yeah.
overly big weight. And so like 3 times and finally I'm just holding it like this and I got to unclip the weight. And I threw the weight in the bottom of the boat and I had to reclip because and it's scratching on the bottom of my rough ass boat. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get this fish in. So anyway, I end up switching hands. So I
Mhm.
switched the net over and I hit my tripod holding my brand new iPhone basically. And I hit it so hard that it bent one of the legs and it tipped over like this in slow motion. And I just couldn't get to it. And it slapped the gunnel of the boat and the phone flew out. And I could see in the night because it was fluttering. I saw the light go dim. And I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I'd made such a big deal over this. And then normally it wouldn't be a big deal if I didn't film a fish of that caliber. But,
Mhm.
I hadn't caught any monsters like that because I didn't have the time. It was, and we'll talk about this early when people start asking questions, which I
Mhm.
can't see chat at all. I don't know. So if anybody has questions, you're going to have to tell me.
Okay.
But so I thought, what am I going to do? I hadn't kept a fish in probably 20 years, and luckily, since I was going to get my big baits and all this stuff for my epic catfish saga,
Yeah.
where I was going to be gone for 3 or 4 days, sleeping on islands and in a little
Mhm.
tent, maybe a hammock, and bringing an axe and whatever, cooking food, doing all this Huck Finn shit. I've got this gigantic bait cooler. It's like 128 quart. It's 4 foot long. Well,
Yeah.
the fish was quite a bit longer than 4 foot. But one cool thing about catfish is they kind of fold. So I didn't fold them in half. It wasn't
Mhm.
8 foot long, but I mean, I folded this thing up and it had, I had, shoot it. I'll bet the well water wasn't, I'll bet it wasn't 4 hours old
Yeah.
with not very many baits in it, and if you have a live well and it's
Mhm.
purging and all that stuff, it'll get kind of nasty. Protein will build up, ammonia will build up, but it was good. So I basically lipped this fish, drug it over the gunnel of the boat, and then proceeded to put it in this big cooler with the pumped oxygen and all that stuff. And so
Mhm.
I basically drove it home, and it stayed because I had to get a new phone.
Yeah.
That's not so easy. It's not like you just go to the phone store if you have it, which luckily I had like a lost or stolen plan for it, so
Mhm.
it wasn't like $1,000 phone or a $1,200 phone. But the problem is, even with that, you got to get the exact same phone. You can't upgrade. So uh, they literally drove. They have some sort of service where they literally drove a replica of the phone that is now in 20 foot of water on the Mississippi to my house and then set it up. And so then my wife actually, Sean came out and he looked at the fish. He's like, that's the biggest flathead I've ever seen in my life. But Sean's all busy. He's got to do a whole bunch of stuff, preparing for
Mhm.
winter's coming here early.
Yeah.
So he's like, no, I can't go with you. So my wife actually went and she filmed the release of it. And I told the story on the old TikTok. Uh, and that seemed to work.
That's cool. Cool story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Massive flathead. I love them.
Yep. 52 inches long, 67 pounds.
Wow. That's awesome. That's amazing.
And it was by myself. That's what,
Mhm.
it is by far not the biggest catfish, biggest flathead I've ever caught.
Yeah.
But the circumstances just made it epic, I suppose.
Epic. That's a good word for it. See if we can change the layout right there. Done. I'll drag you over. I'll try to drag you over. There we go.
Oh,
I'm going to turn my camera off and squint at the camera a minute and read chat.
all right.
We got Mike Sampson in, Shad Daddy. We got Yawzer says good luck. I'll keep popping in since I'm on the graveyard shift. Annette Aspen's in here. John Boyd's catfishing. We got Fisherman Sid, how you doing? January Sports Highlights. Catfish Cowboy. Donald Long says hello. Jose's in here. Bob and Doreen Family Fishing, hello. Shirley T. The Bullock Experience. Hey, Greg
What's up,
Burgess.
Kelly?
He says, good to see you guys. Jody and Epic. LG Bass is in here. Hey,
What's
Tom
up,
Cat.
Tom?
Yeah. Danny Stone Outdoors.
Danny Stone.
He says, well, hot dog, we got Epic. Then we got Jeff Bill,
Jeff?
Rob Fox, Crappy Day Darren, David Hughes, Nubby's Catfishing, Jersey Catfishing, how you doing? Mm-hmm. This guy is slam full of knowledge. I love listening to him. That's what Nubby said.
Old Nubby.
Yeah. Hey, Mike Irvin. He got bit by a
Oh,
copperhead not too long ago. Hey, Eddie Jenkins. Nubby did.
yeah.
Jeff Bill, when you have that much knowledge, you automatically require a hat like his.
You know, we literally went to, and we go every year, and we went up to Green Bay, Wisconsin. My best friend from school, way back, probably 4, 5, 6 years old. Uh, his family has a cabin up there at Fish Creek, and we ended up going to this hat place. And I'm not a big hat guy, but I just saw this hat, and it's kind of alligator skin, see it?
Yeah, it's a fit.
And it kind of fit good. And I was like, huh, I just might actually buy a hat. And I do wear it quite a bit.
It's
Especially
cool.
if
I
I'm
like
angry about not catching giant catfish.
it. It suits you. It looks good on you.
Yeah.
Hey, Chad Thomason, Rebel River Cats. Donald Long. Hey, Quiet Man Curtis.
What's up, Quiet Man?
Great Family Fishing. How you doing? How is the river and what's bar? Did you guys get tore up? We did very well there, but they are running like 88 to 98K and they shut the lockdown. So won't be no fishing up there for a little while. Till further notice, they shut the lockdown.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Catch Fish with us. How you doing today? Moon over Miami. Welcome in. Berlina Smith. Hello. I think we're getting close to the bottom. There's the Muddy River Catfishing saying hello, everyone.
What's
Mr.
up, Rick?
Flores. Yep. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate that.
You know, Jody, I really enjoy everybody's, all the videos I can watch, all, whatever time I've got. But I especially enjoy Chris because, I mean, he's just kind of a legend. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he was one of the first people I ever saw on YouTube besides Steve Douglas. I mean, you can hardly find anybody else back in the day. And, it's not that I grew up because I mean I was already old, but uh, I really enjoy Chris because you can tell his heart's in it.
Yeah. He's got the best personality.
Oh
I mean, you just can't beat him.
no,
He's outgoing, bubbly, just the life of the party. I mean, he's just, you just can't beat Chris, his personality.
no, he's a good dude.
Yeah. We got Kevin. When is the next time do you think you will be going live fishing? Hey, Nate.
Well, I tried to go live, and I assume he's asking me. I tried to go live several times, and we were, and I should explain this, but it's going to get long and involved. So when it was raining and raining and raining this spring, I hadn't seen that much rain on the for the Mississippi watershed early in the season, all the way up until April, probably July 4th. I knew that the population of big fish were going to stay south.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm kind of, I'm not very well geographically located for catching giants, believe it or not, because if we get too much water, blue cats are not like flatheads and channel cats where they will migrate up in high water. They'll actually stay put or even go farther down. It takes stable medium to low water for big blues to come from halfway across down the United States all the way up to where I'm at within 4 hours or so
Mm-hmm.
of being able to catch some 60, 70, 80, 90 pounds, hundreds, stuff like that. So I knew it was, and I didn't want to believe it, but I had seen a couple years like that, and it was really kind of a struggle to catch, to even mark, not just to catch them, to even find giant catfish in classic locations or even not classic locations. So, but Sean and I went anyway, and we were having to go to areas that were a lot more remote to find any fish at all that were worth throwing some baits at, and we just didn't have a signal, and the fishing wasn't that great. I mean, I think we looked for 6 hours one time in late July, and or I don't even think it was late July. It was a little earlier than that. But I mean, we looked for 6 hours, and I didn't see a fish on sonar that I even wanted to throw a bait at, let alone go live. So, and we caught fish. I mean, we caught some 30s and we caught some 40s and we caught a bunch of, teeners and, whatever. But the population was very thin. It was, and I should retract my word that I said bunch, not a bunch. I mean, what I
Mm-hmm.
call a bunch is usually 20 to 40 fish. We're talking a handful or two handfuls of fish of not very epic proportions, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So we had planned to go live, but we just didn't. I mean, we had some early flathead trips that were like kind of fair to Midland. I mean, I think the biggest. I mean, shoot, we did go live, and I think we caught 120 pounder was the biggest we caught that whole day. I mean, we caught several fish, but as far as trying to get on some giants, it was a little bit rough. The times that we were able to go, and the thing about if you're going to catch monster fish, you got to be able to go. And I was busy with work. Sean was busy with his stuff, and we just couldn't pull that stuff together this year for some reason. Hence, my attitude got really sour because epic catfish without catching giant fish in a season, I'm a little bit owly, and my wife says you just need to drop everything and you just need to go, and it doesn't matter. And I'm like, that's right, I'm doing that because and I actually didn't have to go do that. It took one time, but I think I was severely lucky instead of severely good. I mean, yes, you have to put things together, you have to put the equation together and all that. But as far as going down to St. Louis area or just above it and catching a bunch of donkeys, the donkeys got to be there. If they're not there, you're wasting your time and wasting your money.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Sean got a little jaded on even going, even though I was like, oh, I think they're going to be there, because I'm the all-time optimist. And so uh, yeah, we just didn't put any good trips together. I mean, 4 hours down there, you're staying overnight in a hotel and all that stuff, and Sean isn't into going down there to get beat up and not catch giants. I mean,
Yeah.
so then I made up my mind. I was going by myself, and then you heard the story earlier how I finally caught a giant flathead, you know, and but I'm still wanting to go. But the one thing seasonally, the migration patterns of giant blues are as soon as we get into basically October, they all start moving down again. So we didn't have that many that moved up. A lot of them stayed.
Yeah.
So now, with every day that passes, you lose population of fish over 50 pounds. They're the first ones to leave 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s.
Yeah.
They just start filtering downstream. And that's one thing about blue cats that it took me a long time to figure out. But blue cats migrate on a flowing river situation. And below St. Louis, there's not really any dams of any consequence. Okay. So they just don't they don't move up through dams very well. So the giant catfish population is basically from St. Louis down to Louisiana. Once you go one dam up, yeah, there's still a few. There's still
Mm-hmm.
the odds of catching a hundred pounder gets slimmer and slimmer the further you go up until their migration pattern is stopped at Keokuk. Now, I've caught some 90s at Keokuk. I've caught a lot of 80s, a lot of 60s, a few 70s, and just a ton of 50s and 40s. But nowhere near the population at Keokuk, which is the farthest north point on the Mississippi as it goes down, because it's got Meyer, it's got Canton, it's got Winfield,
Mm-hmm.
it's got all these dams in there, and if the water's severely low and they got the clams shut hard, you have even less of a population. It's got to be just right. It's kind of like porridge, you know,
Yeah.
not too cold, not too hot, just right. And when
Right.
it's just right, and a lot of times it is, but this year it just wasn't.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like I'm making up excuses, but I'm not.
No.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
I would just assume that the river was a normal situation from May all the way till August 1, and it's donkey season. I mean, that's just what it is. This year just wasn't that way. Now, could I go to the Tennessee River? Could I go to Kentucky? Could I go to Louisiana? Yeah, I could, but I just haven't had the time, fiscally or financially. Starting a new business,
Mm-hmm.
you are a complete slave to it. I mean,
Oh, I can imagine. I know. I know what you're talking about. I mean,
oh yeah.
that's that's how you make it. Your first year, you got to put all that work in.
Well, yeah,
You're doing it for
you end up
free,
working
really.
3 times as many hours as your employees and
Yeah.
making a quarter of the money.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it just is what it is. Uh, you know, but there's been some good things this year. I mean, as far as catfishing, not a whole lot. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I am going to try to go again because I think I got a last ditch attempt to locate a monster blue and actually catch one. Might have to be by myself, but
Yeah.
and I don't think I can land one by myself.
It's
I
hard. I can't
well,
imagine landing one that big.
no. I cannot imagine, even in low water like it is now,
Mm-hmm.
being able to land a 80 or 90 or 100 or 130 when I can't reach it. I
Yeah.
just I just won't be able to reach it because that current is so strong. Even if you get them to swim along the bottom and pump them up, you get like a half a second to like try to put a net under it, and I'm gonna have to throw the. I mean, shoot, with that flathead, I had to put the rod in between my legs. And flatheads aren't fast swimmers; they're just tough. And you get a blue that like, I might lose a rod. I might fall overboard. Who knows? Who knows? But the odds of being able to do that at 55 years old are a lot less than even at 30 years old. I just don't see it. So I'd have to go fishing with somebody I don't really know or don't really, whatever. I don't know. I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I'm trying to be an optimist.
Yeah. Well, you're in those conditions. You can't just take anybody on the boat with you like that.
No,
They
you
have to know
can't.
what they're doing, and be able to work together.
Yeah.
This may sound bad, but you can't babysit somebody. They have to be able to do for themselves and know what to do. They have to
I
be
could
experienced.
take Jerry Parker, that's for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a few others in mind, but how many of those guys have 3-4 days to do that in a row? They don't. It's just going to be, so it'd be basically a camping trip, and I'm going to want to go out, and at any moment that you go out from your camp, and you might hook into the biggest, you might hook into 150, and there's no way that's happening, and even if I could drop my anchor, just drop it in the water, because I've got buoys for it. Then you got to run the boat and do the fish and deal with the barges and stuff. I think a guy might. I'm not saying that a guy would die, but I mean, you've got a better chance by yourself at like being the last day you ever walked. I don't know. I don't know.
The fish isn't worth your life. That's what I always say.
Well, you could risk it. I have many times.
Yeah.
But I don't like those odds by yourself.
Yeah.
When I used to fish by myself, I just wasn't smart enough to know about where big fish lived. And I caught a lot of 20s and 30s and maybe some 40s and 50s. And I occasionally got onto a big fish. But I didn't fish the extreme current that I do now, since I know where giant, like super giants live. So I spend most of my time in that super fast water, that super deep fast water with giant baits and all of that. With nobody to reel lines in, if I've got 3 or 4 lines out, that's the kiss of death, having too many lines out. Because I mean, the odds of you losing a super giant is there. But if you don't go, you ain't catching them.
Yeah.
That's kind of what.
Bird the word come in. Bird the words come in, and Wabash Nate.
What's up, Bird? Wabash
Nate. Crappie barbecue.
Speaking of Wabash Nate, I've been wanting to fish that lower 30 miles of the Wabash for quite a while. And maybe if my stars don't change and it's the same situation next year, that might be where I do my epic catfish saga down there. Because that river, although challenging, does hold some giants at times. And if you know what you're doing and you know what you're looking for, and and it's going to take a lot of research, but I think a guy could pop a 90 or 100 down there in a lot less current than what I deal with on the Mississippi.
Greg Burgess said, here in Louisiana, New Orleans area, the Mississippi is still low for this time of year.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a ton of fish down there. I mean, that whole Mississippi. Okay, so it's kind of like for you guys trying to, I'll try to put this in perspective. So you got Louisiana down there at the salt line, and then you got all the way to Keokuk, Iowa. It's a long way, but that population acts like a slinky. Okay, so the first part in about, and there's blues throughout it all year, but I'm talking about like the massive population is usually a couple of states above Louisiana down to the salt line. Okay, it's a bigger river, lots of space, there's lots of whatever, but there's an absolute ton of 10 to 50 pound fish, 60s. But with any population, you have a small population of fish over 60, 70, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller all the way up to 100 and to above 100. But yet, the small fish start to move first. So you got a slinky that's fairly compact because a lot of them push down there in the winter. They start pushing, like I was mentioning, about October, about Halloween. So our population up here gets less and less and less. And so it starts compressing. Okay. And the big fish are the first to leave and the last to get here. So they linger a lot longer, in July and August. With July, you've got spawn to deal with, and they don't really start going upriver until about, mid-July. And some of them do if the water's right. If the water is normal, you'll get a bigger population come up, so that slinky will just expand like this. But as soon as the cold weather starts coming, you get the big fish going, and they start compressing down in that last 3-4 states. And so ours is a little tumultuous here, and remember, it's the same way with big flatheads. It's the same way with channel cats, and the same way with blues. The first ones to move on a new situation are small fish. Big fish have the time to wait, so it'll take them a little bit longer. All right. Now, if you're in a situation where you've got a mother river right there, and then they're just moving into tributaries, the big fish are the first ones to go. But if it's a long stretch, you get smaller fish, and I mean fish under 50 pounds, to do their fastest migration. And then you've got the bigger ones that'll follow that up by 2, 3, 4 weeks. And if your weather and your water conditions isn't right, they'll stay home. So it's just one of those things where I've realized that because of my geographic location. And all the years that I've fished, and I see that movement, that swell of big fish, where I might, like last year or the year before that, it was normal, and I might mark not lots. It's still a fairly thin population up here, but compared to what I marked this season, I barely marked any fish I wanted to fish on, and I'm telling you, I looked and looked and looked and looked hard, and I know what I'm looking at on my fish finder. I know what I'm looking at as far as current. I know what I'm looking at as far as depth. I know all that stuff, and I was severely disappointed, and I shouldn't have been. I was too optimistic, thinking, well, maybe it's going to be a little different. Nope. It's been the same as it's been for the last 30 years. You get that kind of condition, at that early, and it just keeps that slinky from moving up to where I'm at. And but if I was going to fish Louisiana, I swear to God, I would be throwing the biggest baits that you've ever seen, because there's so many fish. I mean, we're all seeing it, 2,000 pounds of fish in a day, 3,000 pounds of fish in a weekend, and they're so busy. They're fishing 50, 60, 70, 80 foot of water. I would have to throw baits that were like what I was talking about, that sucker. That thing is like 9 pounds, cut him in half. And that might even be too small. I might need something so round, it's like a buffalo that's like that big, something the size of a goat head, because my objective would be to go down there and land the biggest fish I could. And although it would be interesting, like the first day, you just get wore out with 2,000 pounds of blues with an average of 30, 40 pounds. Well, that is not what excites me. What excites me is giant fish. So, it would be ridiculous. I'd have to use at least 16-knot hooks. I'd have to use something so big and catch like 3 fish in a week, not 100 fish in a week.
Yeah.
If you get what I mean.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Now, I know what guys are thinking. Well, elephants eat peanuts too. They do. But the odds of getting into a gigantic swarm of fish, I've talked to guys down there, I've seen what their fish finders look like and all that, getting this gigantic swarm of blue cats where it's like the Potomac almost, where there's so many blue cats per acre or per gallon of water that it's just ridiculous. The one thing that I know is that little fish are more active and more likely to pick up your bait. Even if I used a bait like this,
Mhm.
a 30 can still eat that. And I would be spending time reeling in fish and I would miss the giants. You'd have to happenstance on one. You'd have to about throw it in front of his face, or
Mhm.
he just got active. Because what I know about giant fish is, let's just say I'm moving to a 40-foot spot. It's got a good current break. I've marked 3 giant fish and about 10 25s or 30s. It never happens where the biggest ones eat first. Never.
Yeah.
I mean, only unless there's 1 or 2 giants there and there's no other little fish around. Because those fish will sit sedentary and it takes them 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 20 minutes before they get active enough to literally eat your peanut that you put out there.
Mm-hmm.
But before that happens, you end up missing those big fish because you've stirred up the whole thing by catching a bunch of 20s and 30s. And I know it sounds like I'm complaining, but I'm not.
The little ones take your bait out of the water.
Dude, at one time, 20s and 30s, I was dancing a jig.
Yeah.
I mean, but, I've caught so many of 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s that I don't really, 60, yeah, we'll get the phone out, take a picture of a 60 or film
Mm-hmm.
it or whatever. I'm still pretty happy about that. And I'm not downplaying 50s either. And sometimes we're pretty thrilled with 40s, but, you know, I get really excited about 80 plus, 90 plus,
Yeah.
100 plus, 110 plus, 125 plus. Yeah. That's what that's my goal. I don't know. I mean, the way I look at it, most people could be like, God, that epic catfish guy, he's kind of an ass. He doesn't like little fish. Well, I appreciate little fish, but that is, I'm old now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm it's not that I'm over that. I still shoot. I mean, and it really does depend. I mean, I can't say I don't like little fish, but I don't like it when little fish bite my baits before big fish do because I'd rather catch the big fish. That's it.
Yeah. The little fish are taking your opportunity to catch the big fish out of the water.
Yes, yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
are. They will. Not always. I mean, I have pulled up on a spot and caught
Mm-hmm.
130. I actually, one of my top 10 acres was in 2007. And now that's been a long time ago, but we caught, 2 100-pound fish on that same anchor. We caught 70s. We caught an 80. We caught a near 100. The small fish was a 40. And guess which one bit first? The 40.
Yeah.
And if there'd have been a lot of 40s, because we
Mm-hmm.
were fishing with peanuts, we wouldn't have caught a lot of those other fish because we'd have done, they would have done got up and moved before, because if there was 10 40s, we'd have caught 10 40s. And
Mm-hmm.
then the 80s and the 90s and the 100 and the 125, they'd all been gone already. So the window of opportunity is something, it is. It's the
Mm-hmm.
window of opportunity that is kind of paramount when you're chasing the biggest of the big, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got a question.
Yep.
So we got all this current falling from the dam now.
Yep.
Should we be fishing that?
Yep. Yep.
I know we fished earlier this week, Saturday and Sunday, and James got like a 60, a 44, and like 3 in the 30s,
Sweet.
just like within 2 hours.
Yeah.
And he was in the lock fishing that current seam.
Okay. Okay. Now, one thing about now, you fish the Tennessee. Those
Mm-hmm.
fish are not acclimated to super fast water.
No.
So fish on the Mississippi are. So
Mm-hmm.
I target certain areas that are basically neck downs, not wide sections. I fish riverine sections. I fish areas that have fast water, like the main channel, and they have a little bit slower water or current break adjacent to it as feeding areas.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't normally sit in those areas like they do on the Tennessee. I've been to Tennessee, marked some fish, caught some fish, blah, 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 blah. But the harder the current break you have on the Tennessee seems like it will attract bigger fish uh, if it's within 3 days of the water coming up. Okay, but they
Mm-hmm.
will even acclimate, even though I call Tennessee River fish out of shape. And I call James River fish out of shape too. But because it's not one of those. I mean, they have the luxury on those rivers of getting pretty round, and
Mm-hmm.
whereas as a lot of the fish that I catch that are only 60, if you put them in that slower water in a lake or whatever, they're going to go 75 or 80. Because they're just going to be that more round. They're not going to be as athletic or whatever. But I like those mean fish. I really do. I like
Yeah.
those ones that are going to give you a hell of a tussle. But to answer your question, is within 3 to 4 days of the water coming up, those areas like in front of the lock where they're not really feeding water through, those
Mm-hmm.
tend to gather the fish because they were in the current. The current comes up and they just shift back and over or shift back and downstream. And so you're absolutely right. Those are great areas to focus on. But what happens after 3 or 4 days of the same water? All of a sudden they go back to right where they used to be because now they're acclimated to
Okay.
it. And I used to be quite frustrated when I fished the Mississippi River let's just talk about and this isn't the actual depth, but
Mm-hmm.
a normal reading was 6 foot because that's where they put the thing.
Yeah.
I would go down there at 19 foot and expect them to be in the current breaks and in areas that are slower current. They weren't. They were still there. And the different and 6 foot was basically 40-foot holes, 3, 4, 5, 6 mile an hour current in the main channel, and a little bit less 4, 5 mile an hour if you get like off the backs of wing dikes or around the tips.
Mm-hmm.
19 foot was an absolute kind of a nightmare. As far as fishing goes, I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
prepared. I wasn't prepared with a good enough anchor. I didn't have big enough rods. We just lucked onto a couple of fish by being able to like throw out like 250 feet of rope. And I'm telling you, that was a lot of work. We caught 270s back to back off the tip of a wing dike when it was like 23 foot. But I couldn't muster up any other fish. Um, in slower water than that. All I ran
Mm-hmm.
into was channel cat and flathead. So that's why I tried to say when looking for giant blue cats, you got to throw your flathead and channel cat mentality out the window. And I mean, I really struggled at this blue cat thing because I cut my teeth and became kind of a big channel cat and big flathead master. And then I started fishing for blues. And I'm like, what is going on here? I just thought I wasn't going at the right time. I just thought I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. And sometimes I wasn't going at the right time. And sometimes I was throwing too, shad and baits that were too small, and I didn't have the right stuff. And once I started figuring it out, then I'm like, now I know why I wasn't catching big blues.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if and it's really difficult for me to try to teach people based on my experience solely fishing the Mississippi because it is a different situation. It is different than what I would call a major tributary. It's different than the Ohio. It is different than the thing, but the nature of the fish is always the same. Okay, so the instincts of the blue cats, the flatheads, and the channel cats are always the same no matter where you put them, but they have to modify their behavior to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start at the equation current first, depth second, and cover third, you're pretty much on catfish no matter where you go. But it kind of gets a little bit bigger. That's like your simple equation that you would find in a magazine. Somebody says, "Well, here's the equation to beat all equations. Here it is. Here's that cover, depth,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, uh, current, depth, and cover." But then you got to start splitting off because it's current speed,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the species you're after for the time of year that it is and what is available. Because I mean, if you fish a lake, you got to take the current out of it. I mean, there is no current. So
Yeah.
I mean, even though the equation works well, it is very difficult to explain, which kind of makes it fun, I suppose.
Yeah. Just experience and learning.
It is, and I tell people that, but you can get fairly close just by listening to several people that are out there these days. I mean, there is several people that they've got enough knowledge, they've caught enough fish. Now, I don't. It's hard to articulate sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get that message across. But and there's guys out there that catch giant fish. They can't tell you why they catch giant fish, but they just know it, and you can see it in their videos, and you can see it in their pictures, all that stuff. You're like, oh, that guy's catching big flatheads, all the time, but they can't explain it. They
Mm-hmm.
can to an extent, but it is a difficult thing. But I've kind of practiced my whole life at being able to help people because there was nobody to help me.
Yeah. But that's great. You share, your knowledge and your expertise with everybody because I have learned a lot from listening to you. I know everybody else has too.
And I'm glad to do it because
Mm-hmm.
we don't have. I mean, I don't want to talk about the economy or anything, but I mean, I have less time now than when I was 25,
Yeah.
and I'm sure everybody else is kind of like that. I mean, maybe you could get lucky and kind of
Mm-hmm.
you know have a windfall or whatever, and all of a sudden you can fish a lot. But I mean, it takes a lot of effort to maintain, you know, an economical, you know, lifestyle these days. It just really
Mm-hmm.
does.
Yeah. Times is harder. Maybe they'll start getting better. We can just hope and pray.
I am praying.
Yeah. I'd like to thank everybody coming in. I see Jonathan May and Wilsden Outdoors, Lance McCoo guy. Becky's been in, Donald Long, anything is possible. Greg Burgess, Jody, and Epic. I can't read that. uh, I can't read that. Sorry.
I have. Matter of fact, Greg, actually, no, I can't say it, but um, left. I still can't say it, but I do believe that Jeremy Creole Catfishing fishes that area. So I have heard of it. I just don't know
Mhm.
a lot about it. And actually, if I was to get lucky enough to be able to retire and just go fishing, I would thoroughly pick Louisiana and just above Louisiana to learn a whole bunch more about the nature of giant blue cats. I really would.
3B fishing's in. All right, it is 7:33. Appreciate you coming up with me tonight and being my guest. It's
I
always
hear
fun
you,
with
Jan.
you. Very educational, very learning, and it's just awesome to hear you tell stories.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, a lot of my old stories have kind of melded into one. I got to really think hard back in the the day on specifics. But if I try hard enough, uh, even though my brain is a little bit of full these days, it's kind of like I don't know what you want to call it. I'm still probably working with a floppy disk, and it gets full, and
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember specifics, but there's been some absolute crazy stuff that I've done, and some really dumb stuff that I've done, and there's really like uh, geez, I mean, yeah, it's really hard to tell a specific story. I'd have to really think about it, but
Mm-hmm.
a generalization is that from the time I was little, I was always excited about what I called monster fish. I mean, and at the time, a big fish was a 10-pound catfish, yes, but
Mm-hmm.
I was always enthralled with 50, 60, something that was giant, something that was like I mean, I was a dinosaur kid. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you grow up like in T Rex and freaking, Stegosaurus and Triceratops, you're gonna like giant fish. I mean, that's just pretty much how it goes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the meaner the better. I thought after watching Johnny Quest, I saw the
Uh-oh. There you are.
I saw the bad guys had Komodo dragons, so I thought that's what I'm getting. And the closest I could get to it was by the time I was like 20, I had like I don't know, a 5 foot long Nile monitor lizard, and I had a savannah, and we fed them rats and mice and giant bullfrogs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I just always liked that stuff. I'd catch lizards when I was little, and snakes and all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's, but I graduated to giant fish pretty early. By the time I was probably 15, 16, 17, 18,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I just wanted to, and it was catfish. I mean, I've done my thing with bass. I've done things. I was a charter mate on Lake Michigan. I mean, with king salmon and
Mm-hmm.
cohos and lake trout and all that stuff. I've done my share of musky fishing, done my share of giant smallmouth fishing. But catfish to me is really where it's at. I just kind of fell in love with the way they act and the way they look, especially flatheads. And I really didn't know
Mm-hmm.
much about blues until I was probably 22, 23, and then I just started going down there because I just heard.
Mm-hmm.
There was no internet back then, really. I just heard, somebody caught a 50-pound blue cat down there. So I'm like, I'm driving down, I'm loaded up all my stuff and I'm driving down there. I didn't know what I was doing, what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask people back in those days, they'd be like, well, this is what you got to do. You got to take this old chicken liver and you got to have this big giant treble hook and you got to throw it out. And I'm like, dude, I was born at night, but not last night. I know that's not true. And
Yeah.
you go to the bait shop and you go, hey, what are the big fish biting on? And they hand you a pack of night crawlers. It's whatever they got. They're biting
Mm-hmm.
on these little goldfish. I'm like, yeah, that's not happening either.
Yeah. I think part of my problem is I don't throw a big enough bait
And I'm
because
sure a
I
lot of people in
downsize my bait
chat
a little.
have been down that same road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They've heard the BS and the tall tales and the whatever, and that's kind of what promoted me even writing for North American Fisherman was
Mm-hmm.
because there were so many fairy tales, and in Fisherman is not exempt from fairy tales, uh, even though they were the best magazine at the time. I mean, when I think I bought a subscription to In Fisherman when I was like 11, and
Yeah.
it's every month it comes. There
Mm-hmm.
was 12 a year, and I would literally get that because they deliver it in the mail, and I
Mm-hmm.
would go into my room and basically lock the door. I didn't lock the door. I didn't have any locks, but I just shut the door and I would read that thing cover to cover, And it didn't matter if it was about bluegills. It didn't matter if it was about, every single article. I even looked at all the ads in the back, and then I would revisit the ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so uh, I got a hold of Doug Stange one time on the phone, and I held him hostage for almost 3 hours. It was bad.
Yeah.
That poor guy.
Wow.
So what else you got?
I believe that's about all
Oh,
I've got tonight.
can't
We
hear
got
you, Jody.
Alan Woolley. You can't hear me?
Yep.
Alan Woolley come in. Thank you for that. Um, we got Roger coming
Jody,
on
you're
here in a few
silent.
minutes. I can't stop it. How about now?
Still silent.
Mm.
I'm a bad sign language person.
uh, I guess we'll just end it. How about that? Can
I don't
chat
know.
hear me
Maybe it's on
talk?
my end.
Can anybody in chat hear me talk? Yes or no? No.
So I got the volume all the way up.
No. Let's see. More. Those comments.
I'm sorry, everybody. I can't see chat for some reason. Well, if I gotta hit a oh. Maybe it's me. Maybe I need to leave and come back in.
Can anybody else hear me? You hear me great? Okay. He just can't hear me. All right. That was really hard typing that. Yep. When his phone glitched, I bet that's when it happened. When he went out for just a second. I bet he couldn't hear me no more. Add to stream. There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. I said, I bet when your phone glitched and you went out for just a split second that it did it.
Well, am I back in or not?
Yeah.
All right. Because
Let's
all I see is your
see.
logo. There we go.
Yeah. Uh, well, it's time to end anyway. Like I said, I
Did,
appreciate you coming on and being my guest. I've had a really good time with you.
did we get any good, awesome questions?
I asked about all of them. Hey, Benoit.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me on. I mean,
Yeah,
it's been a while since I've been on YouTube.
I know.
I've been
You need to
meaning
do a
to get
weekly
on it.
show.
What's
You
that?
need to do a weekly show. Hey,
Yeah.
butterflies.
I'm so unreliable because like tonight I was actually coming home. I was actually supposed to go to Peoria and buy a bunch of stuff for my business, and I had forgotten that I had to go buy a bunch of stuff when I said yes, I'll be on here. I'm just unreliable because I mean I might be working till 10 o'clock at night. I might be
Mm-hmm.
rush ordering. I might be packing stuff. Like shipping and crating stuff.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Well, you can always do pop-up lives anytime you want. You draw an audience, trust me. They would probably
Well,
watch you pack and crate.
and uh, so everybody that's around just asked me to be on here, and hopefully I
Mm-hmm.
can, because I don't think I could run my own because you got to kind of you got to kind of have a schedule for that. But yeah, if I mean I would come on anybody's show that knows anything about catfish, or
Okay.
doesn't, I suppose, if I can.
All right. I'll be sure to tell them. that you're available for
Yeah,
interviews and guest appearances.
yeah. But I mean, you already know that sometimes I'll agree to it, and then all of a sudden yeah.
It's
So
called live. Yeah.
yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
Well,
All right.
thanks for having me on, Jody.
Okay. Thanks everybody for
Known
watching,
you a
hanging
long
out with
time,
us.
and love everybody. I maybe I'll have to watch this and see what everybody commented.
Yeah.
I could.
Yeah. Yeah, there'll definitely be in the playback the comments. So
All right.
all right. Well, thank you everybody for hanging out with us tonight. And we'll be back next Tuesday, and then I'll have a Friday night flathead show. Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And
Sweet.
you can catch Tim on TikTok. He does a lot of shorts. If you
Yeah,
want to go see some of his content.
because I can put out a video drinking coffee in the morning before I go to work. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
reason I really do it.
Yeah.
YouTube takes a lot more effort,
It does.
and I haven't forgot about everybody. So don't think
Yeah.
that.
He's still here.
Yep.
All right. Bye, everybody.